Welcome to Small Talk with the Lees. My name is Brandon, and I'm joined with Justin, my co-host, and Alejandro and Andre, our guests. And today we're going to be talking about the CES Letter, and this is part 3, Spiritual Experiences. In this episode, we're going to discuss spiritual experiences, testimony, and is this a valid form to know the historical truth of something? So I hope you guys enjoy this episode.
And arrows and the fortune's lost. And there's a voice that's buried deep inside my head. As it stumbled out, it said, hey, I got another chance. I was living like a zombie, head in a trance. Everything.
We're going to move on to I nominate this spiritual witness section. I think that should be testimony and spiritual witness. I think that's the most important subject to start off this conversation with. And that's because most people looking at the CES letter will always come up and say, well, I know it's true because I've had these undeniable spiritual experiences. That's kind of what Jim Bennett kind of expressed in the first few interviews on Be Real's show. And so I want to hit that first, and I think we should address that first and kind of what our views on that is. I think it's an important part of epistemology that, there's different ways that we know things. One is by logic, but logic's no good if your assumptions are wrong. We have things that are beautiful, how well a doctrine stands out to you. We have the testimony of others, so we listen to other sources, things we read, things we study. We have spiritual witness, so that's things we feel or we experience, or visions, dreams, profound moments that are very difficult to describe in paper or in words. So if we can weaken this pillar of epistemology, which is, well, what is the solidity? How valid is logic? How valid is beauty? How valid is spiritual experience in determining what we know? I think that will be very fruitful for the rest of this conversation. So let's just jump into spiritual witness. Well, actually, Andre, have you read this section on testimony and spiritual witness yet?
Well, not actually. I feel like I have, just not yesterday.
Probably heard the general objective.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so how about Justin or Alejandro? Do one of you guys want to sum up kind of the arguments in this section?
So
Go ahead, Alejandro.
Yeah, no problem. So basically, one of the big arguments he makes, he really goes after the idea of like, what he does is he provides several examples of where people have felt a spiritual experience confirming to them the truthfulness of something. So he'll give like a paragraph of like a testimony given by an LDS member, and then an FLDS member, and then an RLDS member, and then an LDC-CJ member, and they're sort of similar but have differences, but they all say like, oh, I felt the Spirit and I know this is true. And then the argument he makes is something like, well, that can't be true. Those 3 or 4 examples can't be true at the same time, and they can't all be true using the same method, so perhaps it's not a reliable method of knowing the truthfulness of something. That's one of the arguments he makes.
Yeah, perfect. So I actually watched, I don't know if it was linked, I think it was linked to this letter. There's a video where it goes and you can hear firsthand testimonies of people. So you hear not just the different branches of Mormonism. Most people don't even know there's lots of branches of Mormonism, but right, it's separated. But there's also Muslim people and other people of other faiths. There's like one who thinks he's Jesus incarnated again, and like there's people testifying of him. And so I heard an argument by Jim Bennett that says like the LDS view on testimony is unique, and therefore this debunks this kind of argument that everyone thinks of testimony as the same. So they might have had spiritual experiences, but they're not using it to claim the truth of a religion or a book or anything like that. I think that's wrong, because I actually listened to the the FLDS one. That was the most stunning for me, is to hear someone get up crying in sacrament meeting. You could hear it through the voice. There was just audio, and then she said, I've struggled with this for so many years, but I finally come to the conclusion that polygamy is true. And she's saying this in the 21st century, not back when, in Joseph Smith's time. This is the whatever his name is, whoever Jeremy Reynolds calls Joseph Smith 2.0, but is
Warren
doing better
Jeffs.
at it.
Warren Jeffs.
Warren Jeffs, thank you. Yeah. So this is like the Warren Jeffs era, and it's kind of shocking to watch this video. Like I finally know, the Spirit confirmed with me, polygamy is true, and I'm so happy now that I've married to my polygamous husband, or something like that. So first reaction, that's just kind of shocking, and second is
Shocking.
right, when you watch it, because if you've grown up in just the Latter-day Saint Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints branch of Mormonism, then to hear someone else express any sort of spiritual experience and then link it to how they know something else to be true, that just seems odd, and then it seems to go against your worldview immediately.
Let me disagree. So, because I love doing that. So, I was just in Morocco, and I was talking to a couple Muslim guys. I had the opportunity to talk to 3 Muslim men and ask them everything I wanted to about their religion. And so it was a really, really great experience for me. The first thing that they all 3 wanted me to know, one was actually the first one was, but the first 2 were extremely practicing. The third one wasn't as practicing. But the thing that they wanted me to know, first of all, is that they're not terrorists, which I think is important. And but they also wanted me to know the foundations of their religion, and that they believe that everything that God has put on earth is true. So Muslims believe in Christianity, in Judaism, and in Islam. And so they believe in Jesus as a prophet. They believe they believe that Jewish people are all the correct thing, because it all stems from Abraham. Now, when I asked him, when it comes to polytheism, they don't believe in
like
that.
Hinduism. Okay, they would be
right,
very
Hinduism,
against Hinduism, right?
Any
And
animated.
Well, Buddhism's not, but
Buddhism. He
so
told me
shamanism, they'd be against shamanism. Yeah.
Exactly. They only believe in the big 3: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Yeah.
And so I think really, really interesting. Talked a lot about their customs and things like that. And I think that there's truth found in many different religions. I'm very open to that. I think that they have a tremendous respect towards women and things like that. The Moroccan people, they build their houses so that they have a wall around their house, and there are no windows looking on the outside. They have a courtyard in the middle, and all the light comes in from the courtyard. And so no one can see any intimate behavior happening within the house, to respect the woman. And so I think it's just a really interesting, it even flows into their architecture, their beliefs, and the sacredness of relationships that they have. They build gardens in their homes, because paradise is a land of many gardens, and so they want to have part of paradise in their house. And so I think that analyzing different religions is really important. I think that you can find a lot of truth in different religions. And so this is kind of why I hold this more traditionalist perspective. I do think that you can find truth in many places, but I think that the search of truth is so important that you should look for who has the most. So, for example, one of my favorite apostles is LeGrand Richards. I think Brandon and I've talked to you about LeGrand. Probably name my son after him. He's so awesome. And so, but he has a quote, from one of his talks that he gave at BYU. It's stories from my mission, and his quote is that his I'm going to paraphrase, but his cousin wrote to him. He was in a different country, and Elder LeGrand Richards was in Holland, and so he wrote to him. His cousin wrote to Elder Richards, and he said, I met a guy that knows more about religion than I ever dreamed of, and I think I'm going to join his church. And so Elder Richards said, well, if he has something better than us, you better join his church. if he has something better than God and Jesus Christ appearing unto Joseph Smith and John the Baptist appearing unto them and giving the keys of baptism, and Peter, James, John appearing unto them and giving them the keys of Melchizedek, and Elijah and the coming of the prophets. And if he has something better than this, you want to join their church. And that's the perspective that is that there's truth found in many different places. And if there's something better than what we've got, you better go there.
Thanks for that view. Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on that. I think that the less we focus on Mormon exclusivism, kind of. I was reading a book on the David O. McKay diaries, and kind of how McKay balanced this view of, they said what it makes the LDS Church unique, and he said something along the lines of direct revelation and divine authority. And he made these very exclusivist views, like basically the one true church. This is the only true church, or this is the most true church type views. But at the same time, he had a great ecumenical outreach, which is he connected really well with evangelicals, with Protestants, and with the Jewish communities. With the Catholics, he tried, but he was not as successful with. But because of his deep suspicion of Catholicism. That being said, like I'm very, if that is the view that members want to take, is, like, I believe this is the most true, but I know there's truth out there, and I do value that, kind of the best books study. Let's read from the best books, and they're open to that. I am also, I guess I can't ask for more type thing. My personal view, though, is I personally do not know where the most truth is for me, because I see this as kind of what Greg Prince said, which is he says, I've worked with enough ministers on a professional level that I'm not willing to say that we have the most truth. For me, it is whoever walks the walk. Let's see who walks the walk the best. And I know a lot of friends that are even atheists that live more morally than I do, because I'm not a perfect person, or how I perceive them. They seem to be more moral than I am. And so for me, it's an open question.
Can I interject there? I'm going to interject. I want to include a quote from C.S. Lewis. He said, Christianity isn't about Tom being better than Sally, but it's about Tom being better than Tom was before he was a Christian.
That's a great quote. Yeah.
And I think that the doctrine leads each individual to become a better person. And I think, you do have a point that, I actually agree, right? I'm sure there are many other people that are walking the straight and narrow better than I am. But if this is making me a better person, then I think that it is worthwhile, right?
Great. Yeah. Great summary. Justin, Alejandro, you guys have anything to say about this?
So, I think a lot of concerns for those that grew up with a more exclusivist view I think the initial objections would be, so it sounds like you're moving towards all the religions are true type thing, and it's just
universalism.
It doesn't matter which path you take, as long as that path is taking you closer to God. So why the LDS faith? Why should I pray about the Book of Mormon when I'm a Catholic, and I should stick to my Catholic faith because it has been helping me be better? So I think those would be some initial objections. Or why you'll hear that all the time.
No, of course.
Maybe there's one God, but there's many ways to God. There's a lot of these.
I totally understand what you're saying. I think that it's important. Where do we come from, right? Where do we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? Are essential questions. And the question of where do we come from, if we believe there's a couple of logical things that we need to go through. The first logical problem is there a God? It's a yes or no question. There either is or there isn't. And then the second question is, what is he like? And once we start to realize what he's like, then we can understand ourselves better. And so, these doctrines change tremendously over different cultures and geographies and people and things like that. You can get a very altering version of who God is. And so it's important to chase the truth of who he is, so that you can get to the next couple of questions. What am I doing here, and what am I going to do after?
Yeah. So, Andre, what my question would be for you is, what is your way in which you verify that? Would it be the way in which you receive feelings, or how would you say that you are able to say these are
that's a
truths?
super good question as well. There's something very interesting. My view is a little bit abstract. So in this way, because I think that you have to focus on your feelings. My brother and I were having a conversation about this. We were saying, are you more likely to be more moral in an inconvenient when you choose the more inconvenient route? So for example, like if it's more inconvenient for me to help my neighbor, does that make it more moral or something like that? So the question was convenience, right? Does inconvenience make it more moral? So, or strictness. So for example, you have like this is a really interesting question. So for example, you have like your what are the people that hung the witch trials? What are they called?
Salem witch trials.
Yeah, but the religion, the
Puritans.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, you have your Puritans, your Calvinists type thinking, and it's very, very rigid, very structured, right? And so there's this kind of the inconvenience that goes with it of this structure. And for example, the Shakers, right? They mocked some of our members because lots of early members came from the Shakers and this denomination. And they said, you're leaving the structure, the strictness, the inconvenience for a more convenient religion. So that's an interesting topic there. You know, is it because of how inconvenient it is or how strict it is that's making you a better person? Or what about this feeling of peace? Kind of, this is one that is talked about a lot, and I think that we need to probably press a little bit more attention to this. Moral intuition is something that's kind of interesting, kind of abstract, because it's not the same across the board, right? And so I think that peace or peace or joy is satisfaction in the long term, right? And which choices are going to give you more satisfaction in the long term. And so I think that a lot of the decisions that I make, especially when it comes to faith, is what is going to give me satisfaction in the long term? Is it going to be living a life of faith or not? And so is it going to be being genuine to the things that I already do know or not? Right. And so I think is that kind of getting to your question?
Sure. I think so, but in more specific sense, so what difference would it make if I conceptualize God as in the Trinitarian worldview versus the Latter-day Saint worldview? I still practice the same types of values as the LDS people.
Is this an open question or is this specifically for Andre?
Open.
Okay.
Yeah, Alejandro, maybe tackle it. Yeah.
Yeah, let me jump in because I have an interesting idea. Recently, I've been watching a YouTube series called "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis" with John Vervaeke, and he goes through this historical analysis of why we feel so disconnected today, and he starts. It really starts with Plato. That's like his starting point, but he goes all the way back to like dawn of consciousness and like the shamanistic cultures and stuff like that. And he goes through this entire historical analysis from that point up until now. And we kind of we see like a mental health crisis on our hands. We see like a financial crisis, an opioid crisis. People are more depressed, more anxious, committing suicide. And people are also experiencing a great sense of nihilism right now, despite the fact that materialistically it's like the best it's ever been. And so when I look at spirituality and religion, I try to think like how is this religion addressing these issues, like our sense of connectedness, and how like how do we thrive spiritually when we put this into practice? And then from there we can start to distinguish like, well, certain practices aren't as good as others, or certain practices have unintended consequences that might be worse than others. And so looking at these historical truths and looking at how Mormonism might address these crises, I think Mormonism I think Mormonism over the long term will address them far better than perhaps other religious practices. And maybe one way I can describe this is kind of like it's like, why would you buy an iPhone versus an Android when they're both very good phones? And I guess the answer to that is one fits your personality better, and it helps you accomplish the thing you want to do better than the other. Um, and then I want to bring this also back to the CES letter. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Can I chime real quick there? So
Yeah.
I really like what you're getting at here, and this is where I find religion extremely interesting, is studying the philosophical foundations of the theology. So there's a book that I'm trying to get my hands on. I haven't read it yet. It's by Sterling McMurrin, and it's called The Philosophical Foundations of LDS Theology. And this is where I see, the interesting thing, because you asked about the Trinity versus non-Trinity. It's like, at first, we're taught to think of this as either it's a Trinity or it's not a Trinity, and we assume God exists in the first place. And I think that's very useless thinking, in fact, as far as how it relates to how we act in this mortal life. Okay, so there is a lot of theological development here, and if you read the King Follett sermon, you see that the conception of God in LDS theology is so different from the conception of God in Catholic theology. One is a very abstract essence that is ununderstandable. It's impossible to understand it. The other, the LDS theology, is that God is someone very approachable, someone very personal, someone who is a human that was like you, as man once was, as God once was, man now is, right? That kind of theology. And, I'm not going to put a statement of that's true or that's false, because these are metaphysical claims. I cannot know these things. And that's where I'm claiming from the spiritual witness thing. I don't believe these spiritual witnesses can objectively tell you whether these things are true or false. But the theological developments and what it has to say about meaning in life, like you're getting at, all these actual tangible crises that you can have as a human on this planet, those are profound things. And that's where I see the value in LDS theology. But sorry.
Yeah. Let me interject again. So I had a minute to think about it. I really liked what you guys said. And I think, Justin, your question is a very good one, but I think that it's a general question. And I think that you need to really zoom in and take a look at it. So you said, if I believe in the Trinity, but if I act the same as Mormons, I think you really need to peek underneath, under the hood, to see the engine, to see how a car works. I think that the ideology that you have is what motivates you towards your actions. And so believing a certain thing is going to motivate you towards certain action. So I would have zero problem with someone believing in the Trinity and acting and in following the commandments the way that you should. But the problem is that usually won't happen because one idea doesn't lead to the other. So for example, Brandon mentioned the abstract essence, right? And knowing that, or believing that God is an abstract essence is discouraging. It's something that's unobtainable. It's something that it's not even worth thinking about because we can never achieve it, right? And so we can never understand who God is, what his plan is for us. And so I think it leads to discouragement, and it doesn't allow us to fully have the faithful steps that we need to. So I kind of want that's my answer to your question is I would be fine with it, but I think that one thought, your ideology leads to your actions, and that erroneous ideologies are going to erroneous actions.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I was trying to give just get a grasp on, because Andre, you were talking about how things are true. So I was trying to get more into how would you know then that, and what I get that what you're trying to get at is your actions that are stemming from your belief. That's how you know they're true. So kind of like a pragmatic take on whether or not your belief is true.
Yeah, I think it's given me practicing up until now has given me long-term satisfaction that those beliefs are at least consistent. I think Brandon and I were talking about this earlier, that the truthfulness of something is whether it can be consistent over time, whether a strategy of life can be consistent over time to provide you with the feelings that you're looking for. So if something was false, if doctrine was false, then it wouldn't be consistently giving me the outcome of peace that I'm looking for. Does that make sense?
I wanted to jump in and read one part of the CES letter in this section, and then bring it back to what Andre and Justin were discussing. The ninth point in the testimony and spiritual witness part says, I felt the Spirit watching Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List, both R-rated and horribly violent movies. I also felt the Spirit watching Forrest Gump and The Lion King. After learning these disturbing issues, I attended a conference where former Mormons shared their stories. The same Spirit I felt telling me that Mormonism is true and that Joseph Smith was a true prophet is the same Spirit I felt in all of the above experiences. Does that mean The Lion King is true, that Mufasa is real and true? Does that mean that Forrest Gump is real and the story happened in real life? Why do I feel the Spirit as I listen to the stories of apostates sharing how they discovered for themselves that Mormonism is not true? So that section really jumped out to me because I see a few things. I think that's a genuine question. Like, why do I feel the Spirit when I'm doing these activities? Let's say in this example.
Or the other question is that I've heard is, what's the difference between my own thoughts and the Spirit? That's another question.
Right. Well, before we get to that, let me finish with the first question.
Yeah.
He says, does that mean that Mufasa and the Lion King are true? Like, did it actually happen? And I think this is where like the bad framing is happening here. Like, what he means by true is he's thinking like this is an objective, materialistic reality, and the Spirit is confirming that to me. But I've seen all these movies and I've experienced similar things to what I've experienced. And not only that, but listening to ex-Mormons talk about their experiences. I don't think that like the truths that we're talking about are materialistic truths. They're more like moral truths or ethical truths, like forgiveness and love, agape, faith, stuff like that. Like how to be a good person, because there are good people that are ex-Mormons, and the stories that you find in Forrest Gump and Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, and Lion King, they're moral stories. The Lion King is, I think, is the one that everyone's the most familiar. You have a story of Simba who goes through this. He basically goes through a spiritual transformation and then reclaims his birthright. And
there's a lot of religious underpinning underneath all the Lion King story.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson has a whole episode dissecting the symbology. So
yeah,
and
exactly.
I'd say that's true, right? Like what it's illustrating, like the death of the old self and the rebirth, and then the heroism of coming back and defeating the enemy. Those are all true things that resonate with people. And so, and I mean, if the highest reality for someone is materialism, if the highest reality for someone is the scientific, objective numbers and data, then of course Lion King didn't happen. But I would say that what the Christian worldview is that highest reality is meaning. So the meaning conveyed would be that those things are actually true, whether or not they literally happened.
Well, there's a thing that we have to separate. The reason that there are conflicts between, let's say, a scientific worldview and a religious worldview is it not necessarily because, well, I think the root of that is because people think that they're compatible to a degree, and in my opinion, they're actually totally separate domains that address totally separate issues. And so when you try to overlap them, of course, there's going to be conflicts because they address different topics. And so when we talk about religious truths and moral truths, those can't be proven in a scientific manner. You might be able to, you might be able to tackle them like empirically over long sets of times, because the environment isn't just a material world. The environment that we inhabit is also society and the culture that we inhabit over a long period of time. And the case that Jordan Peterson makes is that we've lived in hierarchies forever, forever. And so that's a part of our environment. And so the religious truths that are presented, let's say in The Lion King and in Saving Private Ryan and Forrest Gump, the moral message there is, how do you act in this cultural milieu in a virtuous and triumphant way. And then you can start saying, well, okay, if Jenny and Forrest Gump is not a good person, Mufasa's not a good person, or not Mufasa, he has flaws, but Scar isn't a good person, and Simba was off the course and he got back on course. And like those principles are true. Like if we're off course, we have to get back on course. If we're in charge of a domain, we can't be willfully blind to the scars and in our lives and stuff like that. And so again, how Reynolds is framing this is he's doing the best he can, and I think that's where the confusion comes in. And people reading this, they haven't thought about these issues, and so he puts these two dots together and he lets the reader fill in the line. But maybe that's not the best way of framing that.
So
And,
can I want to jump in here. Yeah, I'm the Book of Mormon. Let's say that most people, and this is how it's taught, they see the claim that's being evaluated as this book is literally historically true. There are Nephites, Lamanites, all this stuff. Another claim that I propose, so that claim is actually disputable based on tangible physical means, the scientific method, whether or not the Book of Mormon is historically true. Now, another claim that the book makes is that this book will get you nearer to God than any other book. Okay, maybe let's not throw the any other book, but this book will get you nearer to God. Okay, that is a claim that is outside of scientific realm, I believe. And this is where the fundamental division between religion and science is. You can say that, no, there's no division. But usually when people say that, they're trying to make sneaky arguments. They're trying to morph the two. There are claims that can be evaluated and there are claims that cannot with our current scientific tools. So this claim, whether or not this book brings you closer to your conception of the divine and the infinite and the transcendent, I think, I would propose that when people read the Book of Mormon, I've had people read one page with us as missionaries, and they're like, I know this book is true, and then they close it. It's like, well, so if you felt the Spirit when you said that, do you know that every single page in that book is true, or just the page that you just barely read? When you start thinking about it, it's all just nonsense once you start thinking about it like that. There's no way that this witness can be a 100% test that, okay, therefore this is literally historically true. I think that feeling that you get, if you get it, because not everyone gets it, but if you get this feeling while you're reading it, you are having some sort of transcendental connection. And I know this sounds really like new agey and stuff now, but I mean it in a way that there's some type of deeper meaning, which is what you guys are hitting at. And you can analyze these stories, these fictional stories like Lion King, and I don't know about the other, Saving Private Ryan. That's probably like historical fiction, but like you can analyze these things, and there are deeper meanings, morals, and truths that are connecting with you. And that's kind of what seems to generate spiritual experience. There's a whole lecture on this that Jordan Peterson does called, I think it's like this phenomenology of the spiritual experience. Yeah, of the divine. And that is like the most clear-cut kind of rigorous analysis I've heard of spiritual experience. It's been wholly unsatisfying growing up, hearing things like, well, what is the Spirit? Well, it's the third member. It comes to you in feelings. What's the difference between the light of Christ, universal intuition, and the Spirit? Well, it can come, it can visit you, but it can't be with you. What is the feelings of the Spirit? It's like peace and comfort and good fruits. These stuff are very, very general claims, and it's really hard to get your finger on it. And so for me, listening to the spiritual lecture on phenomenology, which basically means what is spiritual experience to be interpreted as,
like from a first person perspective.
From a first person perspective, exactly. So looking at it, what does it mean when somebody sees God in a near-death experience? Do they actually see God? Asking these questions, and I think it's pointless, because once we get to the first vision context, and we're gonna have to ask the eventual question, well, did Joseph Smith actually see God? It's like, well, how would you know if you saw God? Would you ask him? You say, hey, are you really God? There's no way to know these things objectively.
So here's a cool thing I want to point out, and this is going to be very relevant once we get to the first vision. With these moral truths and these spiritual experiences, specifically, let's talk about spiritual experiences. And going back to the frame issue, when you read someone like Kant, the philosopher Kant, one of his main points was that And this is sort of coming out of what Descartes was saying too, the I think, therefore I am. Kant said, well, you can never know the thing in itself. You can never know the thing, like you can only know the thing by being an observer. And so you take the observer out and you're never going to be able to know the thing ever. And so when you look at the experiences that Joseph Smith had and the spiritual experiences that others have had, there's a lot of research and literature written on the phenomenology of spiritual and religious experience. And if you look into that, a lot of these experiences that people have had, these spiritual experiences, are sincere. And I think that's what the CES author is pointing to, that, hey, these people are being sincere, and it seems like what they're saying is true. And there's I think there's a phenomenology behind that. The problem I have with the CES letter is he sort of like draws the line and says this might be true for a lot of people, but it can't be true for Joseph Smith and his experience. And once we get to the first vision, I can explain, like, I think I can make an argument for a frame of reference where his experience and the different versions of how he experienced and described the first vision, how that all sort of connects together.
Yes,
and
that's perfect. We'll get to that. So let's hold that discussion, actually.
Yeah.
Without jumping into it.
Sure. And then the thing, though, at the bottom of everything, though, is sort of that Kantian question. Well, we're never going to really know the thing in itself because we're the observers, and without the observer, we can't observe anything. So we have to let go of this idea of like that science and testimony and all these things provide certainty, because they don't. And I think we make a big confusion here where we believe that we can be certain about things, and we really can't, no matter which angle we take it from a scientific materialistic perspective, from a moral perspective, a psychological perspective. We can't really claim certainty at all. And I think once people do that, people are going to start understanding like what's going on with Mormonism and what's going on with the CES letter.
Great summary. I want to hear, Andre, did you have any pushback you want to put on that view that you can't claim certainty from spiritual experience?
Whenever I was a missionary and I was telling people the story of Mormonism, I always framed it saying, look, a man had a vision, and I probably wouldn't, if someone told me that they had a vision, I probably wouldn't believe it. But there's this book that was written, and there's so much it's so different, and it's so foolproof that this is the reason why I believe that he said, or he saw what he said he saw. And so I think that if it was,
oh, hold on, Andre, you're cutting out. Let's see. We'll have to wait till we get him back.
Hello.
Okay, you're back.
Hello.
Perfect.
There we go. If a stranger came to me and told me, or someone I knew came to me and told me that they saw something, I would be very skeptical, right? But I think the Book of Mormon is such a heavy, such a nice piece of evidence that I think that's why it's there, right? Okay. And I think that we have to look at that.
That's great, because that's actually what on the organizational level of missionary proselyting work, that is what we are taught to teach, and so you gave that's a consistent interpretation, I guess, of how members of the church would view it. So relating to this discussion, though, I want to see what pushes you to link your view of the Book of Mormon and its value and the reality of whether or not an experience occurred for Joseph Smith. And I'm asking this as hypothetically, because I actually believe that the experience happened in one way or another to Joseph Smith, but I want to see, where's your logic in the connection there?
Can you restate the question? I didn't understand it.
So you're saying, like, okay, there's an experience, there's a claim that Joseph Smith saw
God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son in vision. We shouldn't believe that without any evidence. But here's the evidence. There's a Book of Mormon which he wrote. So I guess because I interpret this as, if you believe the Book of Mormon to be true, I see that as more of a value thing. The Book of Mormon has impressive values pressed upon you. I don't see any direct connection between that and the existence and occurrence of a vision or not, if that makes sense.
Definitely. So, historically, right, Joseph Smith was the dictator of the Book of Mormon, and I think that's pretty well documented. I think we would all
Yes.
agree, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So I would turn my first thought jumps to John chapter 9, where Jesus heals the blind man. Okay, and there's a logical jump that they make here that I think is really important. I think that we can just copy and paste this on here. The Pharisees are asking the blind man. They're like, "Hey, this guy just healed you, but he's not with us. He's not who he says he is." And they make this jump here. They say, they again called the man that was blind and said unto him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner," right? Jesus is a sinner. So in verse 25, he says, "He answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see." Okay, and they make this connection that no man can do God's work unless he is with God, right? And I think that's the connection that I draw. I say, God wouldn't make his manifestations through a conduit that, a liar, right? Wouldn't.
Mhm.
So I if I believe in the Book of Mormon, I have to believe, I have to believe the logical trail that the writer, the dictator, was also of God.
Okay, I see. So I'm gonna summarize, because I like what you said there, and I kind of do see a connection there that you're talking about. I think the connection is less rigid than we'd like to believe at first glance. I kind of share the same view as Greg Prince, and that's the reason why I'm going to quote him a lot. But he kind of describes this as, what makes the prophetic role someone a prophet. We tend to think of it as like, okay, they can foresee the future, and that's a great literal claim. But it's more like this: the person has to have two aspects. One is vision; they have to see the big picture, and the second one is they have to allow their followers to experience that vision firsthand. And I mean vision with a big V, as in this is the image. It's to connect with the greater meaning in life, the divine, the transcendent, God, whatever you want to call it. And so Joseph Smith gave his first symbol that he gave to his people was the Book of Mormon. And it was a great symbol. It allowed people, and it still allows people to this day, right? 200 years later, it allows people to connect with the divine. And maybe not everyone, but most of the members would say, yes, it allows me to connect with the divine. And so that is the second part. And the first part is Joseph Smith's vision. And it was started with this first vision that he calls the first vision, right? And I'm playing with these words here, vision. But I see the connection that you're trying to make here, and I accept that. But I think it's a less rigid connection than we want to say.
So here's an interesting idea. So everyone who's gone to college has read Plato's Cave, right? Everyone has read The Cave, and The Cave is an allegory. It has a message about spiritual ascendance and anagoge and coming to the truth and light. That story is obviously a work of fiction. That never occurred, but Plato wrote it to sort of express something important. Okay, it's like a foundational text of Western civilization, and philosophy and spirituality and all sorts of things are everything our Western tradition is based off of like that story. Okay, one of the reasons that Plato is one of the most pivotal figures or most important figures in the Western tradition is because of the truthful resonance of that story. We love, we always come back to that story of the cave. Okay, and so Plato is a titan in our tradition. I think the same is sort of true with the Book of Mormon in the sense that I think the Book of Mormon contains truths that help you, and practices practices and moral truths that help you feel connected to the divine, and also help you organize a society that's very effective. And the profundity of that text is so great that Joseph Smith, you know, I don't know if he was literally like inspired, but he was inspired to a degree, either through the divine or through like his intuition, the zeitgeist, let's say.
Right. When we say
That,
inspiration, it's a mix of human creativity with divine persuasion. And so
something like that,
to what
yeah.
degree we can't put a value judgment to.
Yeah, but I think the Book of Mormon is one of those profound texts that is always going to be relevant for us for, it's been relevant for at least 200 years, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to be relevant for a long time. And I think from that perspective, you can say, look, whatever Joseph Smith was, he was connected to something and deeply connected. And whether or not that's the divine, like, that's going to be hard to parse out. I believe in what he was, but again, these are things that can't be proven empirically. And so I think that's the connection between the Book of Mormon and the claim that Joseph Smith was a prophet.
Yeah, good summary.
And I pull my